Hey, it's the Tipping Point post game show. I'll try to keep this relatively short. My initial impression of William Venable. He had his shit together a lot more than I thought he would. Um, and I was relieved to hear that Paul Lee really has nothing to do with it. Um, that made me feel really good about it, actually. And I'm curious what the over under is on whether they're going to hit the 500 mark that they're looking for. My gut says yes. It seems like they had their ducks lined up in a row and they've gotten a little bit bigger every year. This also seems a time where people just seem to be more prone to do that kind of thing. And I'm not really basing that on anything except for just gut instinct. I think wrestling crowds in general have kind of gone up. Now, but I think they've done a good job of framing this thing of wrestling for a cause about being more about the cause than a wrestling show. And I think that that's a smart way to go. And I think they're going to book it appropriately too. Matt Griffin and Scott Hensley came on and were very open and talked about a lot of different things. Um, a lot of resentment about shows that are sort of fake charity shows and that kind of thing. I've always hated it. It's kind of why I always have an instinctual hatred of charity shows in general, the action and SCI notwithstanding, because my experience was always, since I've been involved in wrestling in the fucking 90s, and it didn't abate as we moved through the 2000s, was if it was a charity show and it involved wrestling, there was some kind of scam or chicanery involved. That's just how I have always perceived it. Um, hmm. And remember the concerted effort the WWE seemed to be making as far as charity work goes. Now, I know they continue to do it, but at one point it seemed like they were really all about it, and it was a big focus of the company. And it just doesn't seem to be that way anymore. I find that very interesting. um, the discussion that Matt Griffin was having about the shows happening in Tampa, he was very negative about that. A lot of those shows are going to lose their ass, and a lot of those shows, and a lot of those shows. And I think it's funny because nobody speaking ever ran a WrestleMania week show except for me. And it did remind me of when we ran a WrestleMania week show. It was the biggest one we ever did at Masquerade. It was the Thursday of WrestleMania week, maybe Wednesday. We were fucking packed. And I know we did well because I got paid off of a cut of the bar, and we got such a significant amount of money off of that bar that they tried to lower the percentage on me afterwards, and I just said, well, we're not going to run here again. That's how I negotiate. I remember reading that in Sex Lies and Headlocks when Vern was like, "Well, Vince, aren't you going to negotiate?" And then Vince McMahon just looked at him and said, "Vern, I don't negotiate." And that was sort of my philosophy about things, to good or ill. I'm not saying that was necessarily a good thing. Certainly, we had a decent thing going at Masquerade and had worked really hard to get that show to the point where it was just packed every time. But I'm just never a guy who likes being pushed around by venues and things like that. It reminds me of a thing I used to always say, which is like, why is it so fucking hard to give people money? When I would try to contact people about running a show in their venue or just anything I deal with, the people who will return a phone call, especially when you're trying to give them money, are invaluable. It's why I think Ox and I have such a good relationship, is I knew that that was a guy that whose good side I wanted to be on, and I knew my reputation was one of all the old timers were like, fuck this guy, and like the guys who whine about running now and the obstacles that they face, fuck you. Like, you have no idea. I mean, um, people froze me out of everything. People would show up to the wrestling school to steal students. Um, Fucking crazy ass wrestlers would show up whenever we would do a first show somewhere and try to get themselves booked on or try to fucking force their way in. And I mean, I had to deal with all of that shit. And I did. And I had to deal with big stars. Scott Hensley, we were messaging back and forth, and he was asking questions about the first sacred ground. Like, do you feel like you had too many names? Because again, like nobody really understands what we were thinking with PCW. We had really different mentality. The first sacred ground wasn't about fucking how much we could draw, that was something that we wanted, but it was really about putting PCW on the map. And I knew if I announced this crazy show where we had Samoa Joe and Colt Cabana and fucking these luchador guys that you'd never seen in Georgia and all this other shit, the first thing everybody would think is it's either not going to happen or they're going to fucking be out of business. And when neither one of them happens, the level of talent I was able to get to come do PCW shows for a song immediately went up. Um, the momentum definitely hit, and that's when we were running full bore. Jungle shows on Tuesday, Academy Theater shows on Friday, Masquerade shows started up after that moment. And it came about as a result of, yeah, these are the guys that deliver that fucking show. Um, anyway, like I said, I'm going to keep it short. It was a show, the tipping point was a show where I talked the least. All those guys were very happy to fucking talk and run their mouth, so I was very happy to let them do it. I will say this, next week is the State of Wrestling speeches. We have 6 people apparently. I would love to have 8. So if you're listening to this, particularly if you're a wrestler, particularly if you're a woman, I would love to hear from you for 2 minutes. Thank you.